Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly support this agreement. Canada is a trading nation. We always have been. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about why that is the case. If you look at the record of various governments over time in terms of trade agreements being executed, I believe under our previous government, we signed, I think it was over 50 free trade agreements, whereas the previous Liberal regime signed, I think it was under 5. And then, of course, it's been the Conservatives in Canada who have seen the vision of Canada in terms of our ability to be a trading nation and actually executed those agreements. So I want to give a lot of thanks to a couple of my colleagues here in the House, our former Trade Minister, our former Agriculture Minister, our former Prime Minister, I can say it now, Stephen Harper, for his vision on this agreement, which was essentially through the blood, sweat and tears of our party, trade negotiators that we worked with within our government. A big shout out to Canada's Public Service for working with our political leadership on this file. But it was hand-wrapped, tied with a bow, put under the Christmas tree for real for the Liberals to execute right here. So much credit where credit is due on that particular note. So a few points as to why free trade is important and why it's important right now. I am very worried about the trend towards protectionism and nationalism that we're seeing internationally right now, because the reality is that that benefits no one. The global economy is such that we are integrated. The global economy has an integrated supply chain in a lot of different areas. So to think that closing the doors to free trade is somehow going to bolster an industry within a country or not have an impact on the nation's consumers, I think is a fallacy. So I say that just sort of as a note of caution to colleagues around the world who might be looking at implementing protectionist policy without really thinking about the ramifications in the global economy of 2016. I don't think that's a particularly productive thing, and I strongly encourage our government to, when they're entering into negotiations or into discussions or diplomatic relationships with countries, that this is something that they vigorously support. They support the notion of trade. I think certainly there would be a lot of people in this House some who would not, but certainly a lot of people in this House who would support that notion. And why is it important? I touched on a couple of those things very briefly already. This agreement, I think one of the things that hasn't really been talked about is the impact on consumers in Canada. When you look at the removal of duties and tariffs, but specifically duties in this case, on the range of products that we're going to have, that increases Canadian consumers' purchasing power by a large order of magnitude. And when you look at economic downturns in a country and the ability for Canadian families to make ends meet, that's why it's very important to have free trade agreements, because the removal of those types of fees and penalties in the right environments can be translated into savings for families, or also a more diverse set of goods. Sometimes consumer purchasing power can be increased simply by saying, okay, if you've got a monopoly on one type of product, let's introduce some substitute goods into the market through free trade agreements, and that also impacts the ability of consumers to spend. So that's a fantastic thing. But certainly the big win here is for the job creating opportunities that are going to be created for this agreement, through this agreement. If I have time, I'll go into some of the specific benefits that for Alberta, given that Alberta is in such a very problematic situation with the job crisis we have there right now. But I want to speak first about what I think needs to happen next in order to realize the full benefits of this agreement. And I'll transition by saying that opening up trade agreements, opening up new markets for our products is a form of economic diversification. So if you use the example, I'll use the example of Alberta Energy Products as one thing. Obviously, there's energy infrastructure issues that are associated with that. But in this example, people often talk about value add for how we get greater value add for the extractive industry in Alberta around some of our oil and gas products, and they often refer to, whenever that discussion comes up, they refer simply to refining or additional refining capacity in Canada. I've read some interesting economic literature looking at how simply opening up Canada's market access for those products will create a larger delta in terms of our ability to capitalize on greater profits from that. So I think that that's a very positive thing. So when you think, if you translate that concept into the market access that's provided by this agreement, I think it's a market of over 500 million people. That's a fantastic thing for basically every sector of the Canadian economy. So what do we need to do to capitalize on that? Economic diversification. When I was Minister of State for Western Economic Diversification, one of the key priorities that I had in my department, that I articulated to my department, was to ensure that Western Canadian economies, Western Canadian companies, small, medium-sized enterprises, et cetera, were supported in both becoming aware of opportunities through agreements like CETA, but also positioning them for success in a global supply chain. So what does that mean? So in the example of government procurement contracts, specifically military procurement, certainly CETA will open up our markets for us to be able to participate in those types of contracts around the world. How do small Canadian firms become certified such that OEMs in these types of companies would look at a Canadian firm to be part of a larger procurement project? This is where I think this government has to, now that they've taken a lot of the credit for signing on this, where the rubber is going to hit the road is how the government programs that type of support service. I haven't heard a lot from the trade minister or from the industry minister as to concrete actions on how the government is going to look at supply chain development. And certainly I haven't heard a lot about the Economic Development Agency's role in that perspective. I think that there's already infrastructure within the government that is that exists, that could be utilized and leveraged in order to put that in place. Of course, with a large asterisk, making sure that we are not picking winners and losers in government, and that we're not being unwise stewards of taxpayer dollars. But certainly I think trade and promotion initiatives such as the ones, I also want to shout out to the Saskatchewan Trade and Export Partnership, STEP, perfect organization that we used to work with to connect small businesses, producers in Western Canada to larger trade and investment opportunities around the world. Because again, if we can have a larger market for our products, we are going to have a more profitable and vigorous economy in Canada. That's the whole point of having a trade agreement. I also want to touch briefly around the concept of productivity in Canada. I think that in order for Canadian firms to be productive in a post-CETA era, we need to focus on programming and policies that make them productive. I also think that we need to ensure that we're not competitively disadvantaging Canada in a post-CETA era by adding complexity to our regulatory system. I'm very worried about the government sending messages like it has been to the energy sector, where it's put a huge degree of uncertainty to people who would be looking at investing in this sector, saying, "Oh, we're going to change the environmental review process 6 times a Sunday and not tell you how or when." That they're musing about the coal ban and changing the rules. When you change the rules without consultation and without understanding the broader economic implications, you actually hamper the ability of our economy to benefit from trade agreements like CETA. So I kind of feel like while the government is touting CETA, even though they didn't really do anything to finalize it, that there's a broader policy framework, a broader macro policy framework that is actually going to impede Canada's ability to be successful in this framework. So I encourage the government to very strongly really stop marginalizing parts of our economy through very punitive and ill thought out policies such as the ones that the Environment Minister has been putting forward to date. So while this is an excellent agreement, I'm fully supportive of it. There is much more work to be done. And I hope that all people in this place, regardless of political stripe, will stand up for Canada in terms of pushing back against nationalist and protectionist rhetoric that we're seeing in other parts of the world. I think that that's very important. I think we need to push back on the fallacy that somehow closing our borders to trade is going to instantly bring back back manufacturing jobs. We know that's not the case. We know we need to look at things like the retention and training of skilled labor, ensuring that we have an innovative economy where we retain intellectual property that's developed in Canada, ensuring that we have a vibrant and robust intellectual property management framework, and that we attract venture capital to this country through regulatory certainty and other positive policy. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to go back to the member's, some of her opening comments when she talked about Christmas and that this was a gift given to the current Liberal government in regards to the agreement. And to recognize right at the beginning, and I've stated this earlier, Mr. Speaker, is that there is no doubt these negotiations began quite a while ago. A number of years back, I believe it was 2009 is when it first came up, and the Conservative Party and Conservative government was able to get a great deal of the job done. But to try to imply to Canadians that it was a signed and sealed agreement is just wrong. Mr. Speaker, in the last year, we have seen a government that has taken the trade file in a very significant way forward. This is but one of the areas in which we concentrated a great deal of time. And wonder if the member might want to just kind of reflect as we recognize, yes, the Conservatives also played a role, but all the T's and the I's, and there were a lot of T's and I's, had to be finalized before we could ultimately see this agreement that we have before us today. In fact, before the Prime Minister could actually sign the document.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Since my colleague raised the issue, I would just say it's a grand miracle that this agreement was not bungled by the incompetence of this government, given their previous record on trade. 5 agreements in, I don't know how long they were in government, whereas when you look at our record, 50 plus. So I think the proof is in the pudding there, Mr. Speaker. But what I will say is that now Canadian businesses and Canadian companies are looking to the government in order to ensure that they have policy that is going to allow Canada to take full advantage of the benefits that are put in place under CETA. Again, just to reemphasize, I am very concerned about the government's commitment to putting uncertainty into our regulatory process in a variety of different areas. I'm concerned about this government increasing our debt load to the point of unmanageability. I'm concerned about all of these sorts of things which will send a chill and send a message to the rest of the world that despite signing a trade agreement, they would like to see Canada closed for business. So really, I think that's what the government should be focusing on.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was a bit taken aback in terms of the member. She made 50 trade agreements. Well, 50 plus trade agreements is just not true. You know, 28 of those agreements is on the debate that we're having today. 28 countries that the member just made reference to are a part of the bill that we're debating today. Technically, it was this Prime Minister that signed off on those 28 of the 50-plus countries that the member just tried to take the credit for. And I would suggest, and I would ask the member to recognize that the Conservatives did not get the job done. And that has been evident in the last year where we've had our Minister of Trade and other government departments overseas to try to clear up the areas in which the Conservatives failed at doing, Mr. Speaker. And that's what they need to realize. So they should stop saying there's 50 plus under the Harper government, because that's just not true.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, even if we use the number 28, 28 minus 5 is a lot more than they did. And I believe if we're going to talk about didn't get it done, I think that was the exact words that this government's trade minister used when she tearfully emerged from meetings several weeks ago. So I would be very careful if I was the government deputy House Leader person if he was using those words in this House. Thank you.
Good job. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And since I've been here, there's been several trade agreements signed or trade investment promotions and protection agreements. They're kind of the precursor to that. And I'll name some of the countries here, Mr. Speaker, is Peru, Panama, Romania, Senegal, Slovak, Nigeria, Korea, Kuwait, Tanzania, Liechtenstein, Mali, Jordan, Latvia, Benin, Burkina, Colombia, Guyana, and Hong Kong, and Ukraine. And the claim by the Conservatives is that this government has not created a single job. So my simple question is, why do we have all these trade agreements, and where are the specific jobs? So say, for example, Liechtenstein. What jobs have been created from the trade agreement with Liechtenstein?
Calgary Nose Hill.
I would just say that you never know when you're going to need Liechtenstein. So fantastic. I'm so glad that we have a trade agreement with them, because these types of agreements send a message to the world. They send a message to global capital that Canada is a place that's open for business. Please come invest here. Please come create jobs here. We want to do business with you. When you think about it, especially in the context of this agreement, Canada is in such a unique position in terms of attracting investment, or capacity to attract investment, especially given the rhetoric that we're hearing in the U.S. right now, where they kind of want, it sounds like they want to close their border to trade. So I think that, again, I just want to reemphasize and close by saying this. Our government, our former government, delivered this on a silver platter with some chocolates and caviar to the Liberal government to sign and take credit for. Fantastic. I'm glad we've kicked it over the goalpost, but now this is about how the government positions Canada to take advantage of this agreement. High debt, high taxes, uncertainty in the regulatory system, no commitment to retain skilled labor. These are all very negative things that will put a chill on the effects of this agreement, and that's what we should be focused on. Thank you.